Live from London, this is BBC News. Russian authorities say the Wagner mercenary group is to be disarmed, but will escape prosecution over their aborted rebellion. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says his forces' counter-offensive has made gains on all fronts, describing Monday as a happy day. The BBC's uncovered new links between Syria's regime and trade in the powerful amphetamine Captogen. A damning report finds racism, elitism and misogyny are widespread and deep-rooted in English and Welsh cricket.
What are you doing here? Let's get you! Hey,
And it's goodbye to the Indiana Jones franchise as the final release arrives in UK cinemas. Hello, I'm Regini Vaidyanathan. We begin the programme in Russia, where the authorities have said the Wagner mercenary group is to be disarmed. The Defence Ministry in Moscow says that preparations are underway for the mercenaries to hand over their heavy weapons and equipment. But Russia's FSB security service says the criminal case against Wagner fighters over their aborted mutiny has been dropped because, in its words, the mutineers stopped short of actually committing a crime. The whereabouts of Wagner's founder, Yevgeny Prigozhin, are uncertain. A plane linked to him has landed in Belarus. Our Eastern Europe correspondent Sarah Rainsford gave us this update on the latest developments.
It looks like the message that's coming strong now from Russia is that the Wagner Group is being disbanded, and they're trying to underline the case that this crisis, this mutiny, a very serious crisis of course, is now over, and that Vladimir Putin is reasserting his authority and his control. So we've seen sort of several prongs to that this morning, one of them being the statement, the announcement from the Defence Ministry that preparations are now underway for Wagner's hardware, its military hardware, its weaponry, to be handed over to regular formations of the Russian military. So essentially for the group to be disarmed. Then almost simultaneously with that announcement from the Defence Ministry, there was another one from the FSB security service. And they were saying that the criminal case now against those who participated in this insurrection was to be closed. They said that they had continued to investigate it, but that they had established, they said, that those who had been involved in criminal actions were no longer involved in any kind of crime. So that had stopped, they said, on the 24th of this month, and so therefore today that case was closed. And this is really extraordinary. You know, I can't kind of say loudly enough how bizarre this is for Russia, because Russia's a country that puts people in prison for many years for criticising the government and for condemning the war on Ukraine. And yet here is Yevgeny Prigozhin, who's been doing precisely that for a very long time, very vocally, and who now led an armed uprising, an armed insurrection in that country against the Defence Ministry, and ultimately a big challenge to President Putin's authority. And yet he and his men, we're told now, are going to be allowed to go free.
And Sarah, we know that the Wagner Group played a role in Russia's war in Ukraine. What does this latest development mean for that?
Well, it seems to mean that the war, the massive feud between the Defence Ministry and Wagner is now over, and that the Russian state is saying it's won. They're saying that any Wagner fighters who basically want to continue their lives as soldiers have to join the Defence Ministry structures. And that means that Wagner, as an independent military force, which was so critically important in parts of the fight of Ukraine, of course, particularly around Bakhmut, that force will be no longer. If they're losing their weapons, Prigozhin has now, we believe, headed for Belarus, although that hasn't been confirmed. His private jet was recorded landing in Belarus earlier this morning. So if he's gone, the military group is being disbanded, then it looks like in Ukraine, Wagner will not be a fighting force in the future, certainly not in any sense that it has been up until now. Now, I should just say as well that Mr. Prigozhin, in his statement that he made about all of this yesterday, made the point that Wagner groups were professional fighters that Russia is essentially couldn't do without. He was saying that if the rest of the military worked like Wagner, then Russia would have won this war a long time ago. So he's still sounding belligerent, he's still sounding defiant, but what he can actually do these days is another question.
So, with Yevgeny Prigozhin still sounding defiant, how will Vladimir Putin reassert his authority? We asked Moscow City Councillor Boris Nazarov from the Russian opposition Liberal Party.
Of course, situation is absolutely crazy because big amount of rebels controlled big city. Rostov is more than 1 million population, and then they moved to Moscow. And they destroyed some Russian helicopters, and some pilots were killed, etc., etc., etc. And in Saturday morning, President Putin said that it's mutiny and will be criminal prosecution, etc., etc. And now we see that nothing happened with Mr. Prigozhin. Of course, it is obvious of absolutely evident weakness of Putin's government.
And what did you make of President Putin's address? Do you think he did enough to reassert his authority after the weekend?
President Putin, first of all, tries to demonstrate the situation is under control and he is guarantor of security and stability in Russia, etc., as he was saying about more than 20 years. But now situation has changed dramatically, and many people, ordinary people, voters, first time in our history for 20 years, begin to understand that Putin is not stability, Putin is not security. And moreover, many people in Russian elite, top bureaucrats, deputies of State Duma and governors, etc., was absolutely shocked by this situation. And for 1 or 2 days, they received the absolutely controversial signals from Russian government what to do, what should they do with Prigozhin, with his rebels, etc., etc. And of course, it's a great turbulence for us.
Now, of course, you are a member of the opposition, but what do you think people across the board then think will happen next? You talk about people, even from Putin's, allies, saying that they're concerned about what might lie next.
Of course, and the chances that in the March of next year we should have the presidential election, and previously was absolutely obvious for everybody that the main candidate will be Putin itself, and he will be re-elected. Now it's not absolutely obvious that Putin will be our president for the next 6 years. It's absolutely not obvious.
And let me ask you what you make of Mr. Prigozhin. We're hearing reports that he may now be in Belarus. What do you make of him and his role over the last few days?
Frankly speaking, I do not believe that President of Belarus, Lukashenko, really had the negotiations all the time, all the day, in 30 days with Prigozhin, etc., etc. I believe Lukashenko has just received the command from Russia to say, okay, look, Mr. Lukashenko, you should take this Prigozhin for you. We give him for you, okay? And I think it's a big problem for Mr. Lukashenko because Prigozhin is a really brave man, really brave and strong man, and Prigozhin really controls maybe dozens of thousands of well-equipped rebels, and it's not a good gift to Mr. Lukashenko.
Well, on the ground in Ukraine, Kyiv says its forces have made advances on all fronts. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has been seen handing out medals to troops who've been fighting in Bakhmut in the east of the country. Pro-Russian commentators say Ukrainian forces have crossed the Dnipro River and retaken a village near Kherson in the south. Our correspondent in Kyiv, Mayeni Jones, says Ukraine's counter-offensive appears to be picking up pace.
He said in his nightly address, President Zelensky, was that they were making progress across all fronts, but Russian-backed bloggers have said that Ukrainian forces have recaptured territory around the city of Kherson. The Ukrainian forces announced yesterday that they'd recaptured another village in the Donetsk region. They showed videos of their soldiers in front of a dilapidated house with the Ukrainian flag. So their message is very much that their counteroffensive is picking up pace. They're still not at the main push of the counteroffensive. They're still holding back troops and equipment, but they're saying moving faster than they were in the first 2 weeks, where they admitted that Russia's defenses, which had been built up over several months because this counteroffensive was due to start in the spring, it started earlier this month, and analysts have said that's given Russia time to build very deep defenses, which has slowed down Ukraine's progress. So that counteroffensive, which was slow to start, certainly appears to be picking up speed now.
And we have plenty more on the developments in Russia and Ukraine on the BBC News website. Now, Captogen is a highly addictive drug that has brought misery to many people across the Middle East in recent years. A joint investigation by BBC News Arabic and the investigative journalism network, the OCCRP, has revealed new direct links between this multi-billion-dollar drug trade and leading members of the Syrian armed forces. Emir Nader reports.
On Jordan's border with Syria, its army is fighting traffickers of a drug called Captogen.
They are smugglers. Our ground forces were informed and were ready for them. They fired directly at them, forcing them to retreat. They were crawling for their lives.
Captogen is little known outside the Middle East, where this highly addictive, highly accessible, amphetamine-like pill is wreaking havoc. The Syrian regime has been accused of making vast profits from the manufacture and export of this drug. Now, BBC News Arabic has uncovered fresh evidence about exactly how this trade is being managed by members of the Syrian elite. In Suwaida, close to Syria's border with Jordan, Raji Falhout led a militia aligned with the government of Bashar al-Assad. In July 2022, Falhout's bases were overrun by a rival militia. They found this machine that could be used for pressing Captogen, bags of pills, his military ID, and an unlocked phone. Gaining exclusive access to the phone, we found a series of messages describing the purchase of the machine.
What do you think, brother?
Are you sure that the Hummer can accommodate the machine?
Yes.
But this drug trade is much larger than one man. In 2021, a trial began in Lebanon against a well-known businessman called Hassan Dakou. He was found guilty of Captogen trafficking after a shipment was seized in Malaysia worth over $1 billion. The case was heard behind closed doors, but we met with the judge to find out what was uncovered.
He said he was collaborating with the 4th Division.
Did he give any evidence of his connection to the 4th Division?
An ID card issued by the 4th Division.
The 4th Division is an elite unit of the Syrian army. It's led by President Bashar al-Assad's brother, Meher. The judge concluded that there was no evidence of links between Syrian officials to Dakou's trafficking. But in a 600-page confidential court document, we found a series of WhatsApp messages Dakou sent to someone he called the boss, whose phone number mostly consists of the same digit repeated many times. It's known as a golden number.
This number was obtained from the company in the very first days and belongs to an important person in the authority.
We've traced the number. High-level Syrian sources have told us it belongs to Major General Ghassan Belal. Belal is Meher al-Assad's number 2 in the 4th Division and is understood to run its powerful security bureau.
Could you kindly renew the ID cards for the guys I sent you?
If the boss really is Ghassan Belal, the conversation suggests that one of Syria's most senior officers is linked to the illegal Captogen trade, worth billions of dollars. The Syrian government, Ghassan Belal and Raji Falhout didn't respond to our questions. Hassan Dakou maintained that he's innocent and was working with authorities to prevent drug trafficking. Only last month, the Arab League welcomed Bashar al-Assad back to the fold. As Arab governments struggle to contain an epidemic of drug abuse, elites within Syria continue to profit.
Now, the former CEO of Audi, Rupert Stadler, has been convicted of fraud by negligence and handed a suspended sentence of 1 year and 9 months over his role in the so-called Dieselgate scandal. He's the highest-ranking former executive to be punished over the emissions cheating controversy that has rocked the car industry. Well, we've been speaking to our Berlin correspondent Damien McGuinness about the background to the case.
So you remember back in 2015, this scandal first came to light, where it was shown that certain VW brands, Audi, Porsche in particular, as well as Mercedes, allegedly, had been using cheat software to make cars seem cleaner in test conditions than they really were, because this software would kick in a test and would limit toxic fumes from being emitted from the car emissions, and then in reality on the road the car would actually be dirtier. So this would be in order to sell more cars and to pass certain stringent environmental standards here in Germany. Now, of course, that's a huge scandal because it cost the industry billions in reparations and damages, and not to mention the reputational damage. So this has been going on since 2014. Numerous cases have been brought, but this, as you say, is the first top manager not only to be convicted, but tried, in fact, for the scandal. And what's interesting about this is Rupert Stadler delivered a confession about 2 months ago, which was a huge U-turn. For about 2.5 years during this trial, he said he had nothing to do with it, didn't know anything. Then, when it became clear that he might face a prison sentence, he turned around and delivered what some are calling a partial confession, where he said that he should have done more to prevent it, that he was negligent, effectively. And that's what he's been convicted of today, fraud by negligence. He's not seen as the mastermind behind the whole scandal. He's not seen as someone who necessarily ordered the software. But what judges are saying today is he should have done more to prevent cars being sold afterwards when he knew that this was happening. And so that's why he's been handed this suspended sentence, as well as a fine of 1.1 million euros to be given partly to charity.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
They were all yellow. I came along. I wrote a song for you, and it was called Yellow. Your skin, oh yeah, your skin and bones, turning to something beautiful.
Working together for a more sustainable world tour. DHL and Coldplay.
People are travelling again, heading back out on the road and rediscovering their wanderlust.
Exploring new destinations and cultures, making fresh friends and creating memories that will last a lifetime.
That's why at the Travel Show, we're expanding our horizons too. And wherever we go,
we want you to come with us. Now that might make for an awful lot of excess baggage, but we think you're worth it.
The Travel Show on BBC News.
You're live with BBC News. Next, a long-awaited report into cricket in England and Wales has found that racism, sexism and class-based discrimination is widespread and deep-rooted within the game. The report says most ethnically diverse players experience racism, women are treated like second-class citizens, and cricket is dominated by players from private schools. The chairman of the sports governing body in England and Wales, the ECB, has apologised unreservedly. Our sports editor Dan Roan has more details.
For England's cricket teams, this is a summer to be savoured, both the men's and women's sides hosting Ashes series. But the sport now faces a reckoning after a damning report laid bare entrenched discrimination. The woman who led the Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket told me the game needed urgent reform.
I think it's a watershed moment for cricket, I really do. Our findings are unequivocal. Racism, sexism, class-based discrimination and elitism are widespread and deep-rooted throughout the game. The stories were absolutely horrific, and it goes to show that the culture in cricket is rotten.
The report, called Holding Up a Mirror to Cricket, heard from more than 4,000 people, with 50% saying they'd experienced discrimination in the game. 75% of those who suffered it did not report it to the cricket authorities.
Well, I think the first thing I need to do, Dan, is to apologise, and that's the first recommendation that the report made. So I think to those individuals that have been discriminated against, that have been excluded, all of those individuals, the game, the ECB, the game as a whole, owes them a real genuine apology, a heartfelt apology as to the fact that this should be a game for all, and unfortunately this report identifies with the fact that it has not been a game for all.
Among many failings, the report found that women were treated as subordinate and second-class citizens, routinely experiencing sexism, that there was little to no focus on addressing class barriers with scarce provision of cricket in state schools, that a heavy drinking culture excludes many people, and that the ECB had failed to support black cricket. Maurice Chambers came to Essex from Jamaica as a teenager and said he experienced racism at the club. An investigation is ongoing. He wonders if young black players will even consider cricket as a career.
How many people of my background do you see playing professional cricket now, like these days? There's not many of them, are they? Is this the kind of stuff I'm going to be faced when I, whatever club that, I'll be playing for? Like nobody wants that.
Tomorrow, Lords will welcome a full house for the start of the second Men's Ashes Test, one of the highlights of the sporting calendar. But alongside the excitement, the game is also now reeling after one of the most chastening reports to rock English sport in recent years. The game was already under scrutiny over the Yorkshire racism scandal exposed by the county's former spinner Azim Rafiq. Now, with this fresh report making 44 recommendations, including an independent regulator, the ECB has 3 months to come up with a plan to salvage trust across the whole of the sport. Dan Rowan, BBC News.
And if you want more details about that report and a full breakdown and analysis, you can, of course, go to the BBC News website. Now let's bring you some breaking news that's just come in. The Pope's Ukraine peace envoy is to visit Moscow on Wednesday. We've just had that update from the Vatican. Obviously a very interesting and turbulent time for that visit to take place, and we will of course have more on that when it comes in through the day. Harrison Ford has played daredevil archaeologist Indiana Jones for more than 40 years, and he's about to unpack his hat and whip for one final adventure. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is in UK cinemas from tomorrow. Our entertainment correspondent Lisa Mzimba caught up with Harrison Ford at the film's UK premiere.
It's the return of one of cinema's best-known action heroes and of one of the industry's most successful franchises. With Disney hoping that Indiana Jones's fifth and final adventure will turn out to be
a final triumph.
The actor who's lived with the role for more than 40 years was on the red carpet, reflecting on the part that helped him become a star.
You've of course said goodbye to beloved characters in the past, Han Solo in particular. How does it feel saying goodbye to this one?
It feels right, because I'm satisfied with so satisfied, so happy, so gratified that I was able to make this film. What I'm proud of is that it rounds out the stories that we've told, I think, in a really compelling way.
Well, they didn't get out the doors. Get in the pool.
In this farewell to the character, Indy is, as ever, on the hunt for a powerful ancient artifact.
Fascinating. Right. Water displacement.
And he's joined on his quest by his goddaughter, played by British Fleabag star Phoebe Waller-Bridge.
You grew up watching Indiana Jones on the big screen. What was it like then being part of this, and not just a small role, this huge meaty role alongside Harrison Ford?
I mean, it beggars belief and still does for me. I think I'll only really be processing this many years later, but it's like a dream come true. Like the 10-year-old inside of me gave me the biggest high five when I was in the middle of this movie. It's cinema on the scale that I dreamt of when I was a young actor, and just as a young person watching these things.
Mistakes. The film also has a new villain, played by Mads Mikkelsen.
We've seen you playing bad guys before, most notably against James Bond in Casino Royale. How does this one compare?
It's different. I
didn't watch James Bond when I was a kid. I didn't watch Star Wars. I watched Indiana Jones. And I watched it again and again and again. So that's got a special place in my heart.
A new face too in the director's chair, with James Mangold taking over from Steven Spielberg.
It's always pressure coming on and doing a big movie. How much more pressure was it stepping into Steven Spielberg's shoes?
Well, of course it's pressure, but you realize, in a way, you're pinch hitting for Babe Ruth. You're stepping in for one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. So the opportunity is really to collaborate with him and all the other greats on the movie.
The original 3 films, released in the 1980s, are widely seen as classics. Indy's archaeologist, a perfect old-style 1930s action hero. The big question is whether this type of storytelling still works with an ageing lead character. The 4th film, with Indy some 20 years older, didn't really meet with a rapturous reception when it was released in 2008.
So Harrison Ford and the filmmakers really want this movie to be seen as a return to form, with Harrison Ford and Phoebe Waller-Bridge's star quality helping it to fly high at the box office. Lisa Mazimba, BBC News, London's Leicester Square.
And before we go, some breaking news. We've just been hearing that Russia's President Putin is addressing military officers in Moscow. We'll have more of that on BBC News.